Fund for William Wegman Fay at the Akron Art Museum has been provided exclusively by Summa Foundation.
I'm not what you might call your typical average guy. Sure, I overdo it once in a while, but who doesn't?
I never thought of myself as unusual or strange. Just somehow there are these odd pauses and other stuff interrupts, kind of things wave in.
We have been trying to have an exhibition of William Wegman's photographs here for a number of years. And it turned out I thought this was a brilliant idea of doing an exhibition all based around his relationship, his work with one of his dogs, with Faye. And so it's the collaboration between William Wegman and Faye.
It's the mass appeal of this photographic and video collaboration that drew art and dog lovers to the recent opening of William Wegman, Faye, at the Akron Art Museum.
Bill's really brilliant, incredibly creative use of his dogs, but really the pictures are not pictures of dogs, they're about ideas, and that's what's so great about him.
I see his art as actually a love of light. That's the first thing I see, the way the light wraps around the beautiful velvety flesh of those dogs. So I'm really looking at the light, and I think as much of a sense of humor as he has and as lighthearted as he behaves, he's really a serious lover of the light.
His book, Little Red Riding Hood, was the one book that was probably the first choice of everyone in my class.
Because of the dogs.
Because of the dogs. And because of the fairy tales. I mean, they could view the fairy tale in a different way. It was lovely.
As a child, I was Billy the artist. You know, there's always one or two. The girl that draws horses, the boy that does the airplanes. I happen to do Indians. And I needed an A to help my grade point average in high school, so I took art. And I was in Western Massachusetts, and I had an amazing art teacher there that just talked me into going to art school. She said, "You have to go to art school." And I was in Boston. I did. I obeyed her. And there I found out that art wasn't just about drawing pictures. Like, I guess the big illustrators used to work for the Saturday Evening Post in the 50s when I was in high school. So I figured that, okay, I'll be drawing pictures for some magazine or something like that.
But as it turned out, art for Bill Wegman wasn't just about drawing pictures.
When I got to art school, I discovered philosophy, religion, music, art, you know, the whole big picture. And I got lured into that kind of world, and I ended up not painting. I went to grad school in Illinois, and there I stopped painting. I worked with people in the computer lab and doing interactive things, and I worked with a music school doing performances, and I found myself really kind of out of my original element.
Wegman has always been experimenting with the newest medium, with cutting-edge art. And when he started out in graduate school, he was already working with inflatable sculptures, he was working with photography, he was working with video. So he has looked like many artists that we consider postmodern. He's had an idea, and he's chosen whatever medium was the best to make that idea work.
With his early photographs and videos, Wegman's audience discovers the laconic and wry sense of humor that has become a hallmark of his work.
Hey, you. Yeah, you. I want you to hear something. Ooh, ooh, mm. Ooh, ooh, mm. Ooh, 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 mm. Ooh, ooh, mm. Ooh, ooh, mm. Ooh, 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 ooh. Mm. Ooh, ooh, ooh.
His early videos were very experimental, and he started working with them almost as soon as video equipment was available to artists. as opposed to having to be a broadcast station. So the equipment was rather rudimentary. You had a microphone, a long cord, and a video recorder, and a monitor in which you could see yourself. And so he used those elements, and he used them in a very funny but also very intelligent way, working with the capabilities of the medium. And there's a kind of deadpan humor in them, but also a total brilliance about what was possible within the technical means and what brought out those technical means and those technical limitations. Turning, what did they say it is? Turning lemons into lemonade, so to speak.
But it was in photography, a medium he never formally studied, that Wegman found his niche.
One of my students I was teaching in California had him teach me how to print and develop, because I never really studied photography. So when I started to take pictures of some of my performances, documenting those, or some of my installations rather, and I needed prints, and I really couldn't afford to have someone follow me around and make things for me, so I had to learn how to do it myself. And I got really interested then in the picture. I thought, okay, if I do this, then this picture will be better. And then I had this moment where I said, you know, I should really be making my installations just for the final effect of the picture. And this was a year or two before I got a dog, so the dog had nothing to do with the emergence of photography in my world.
It was getting his first dog, a Weimaraner he named Man Ray, after the famed avant-garde photographer, that changed the course of his art.
I didn't want a dog. I was too busy being an artist. I just started to make these photographs and videos as well when I was in Wisconsin. And my first wife, Gail, wanted a dog, and so I agreed when we moved to California, which we were about to do, we would get a dog, and she wanted a short-haired dog like a Dalmatian or a German Pointer or something like that, not a fluffy dog. She really had something in mind. When we got to LA, I remember we looked at there weren't many Dalmatians, and there's kind of a problem with that breed, I think, with their health, I suppose. They were overly popular at one point and were overbred. Someone said, Weimaraners are short-haired dogs, and they're really good dogs. Right at that time, I saw an ad, Weimaraners, $35 in Long Beach, California. So drove out there and saw this little puppy. I think the father's name was Marathon. And there was one male dog. He was 6 weeks old. I still wasn't sure, so I flipped a coin. Tails, we get the dog. Made sense, right? Heads, we don't. Tails, tails, tails. Okay, five out of 7, tails every single time. So we had to get that dog. And I brought him home, and I didn't know what to do with him. He was just there looking back at me. So of course I took his picture, because it's the new child, right? When you have a baby, you take the picture. And then I had to take care of him, so I brought him to my studio, and I really had a hard time keeping him out of my way. Stay over there. I'm taking a picture of this stuff over here, and he would come right in front of me time after time. He was making these little videos, and he'd be right there. So I let the camera run when it was a video, or I set up little things for him, and that's pretty much how it started. Then he became very attached to me, and vice versa. 10 or so years after I started to take photographs, I was invited by Polaroid to experiment with this enormous camera that they had come up with in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and that was a very different beast. There it came with technicians, people that ran it, because it took specific abilities to load the chemistry and do all of that. So there was more like having a big crew of people around to make the pictures. Think of a cello combined with a refrigerator. That's what this camera looks like. It was very antique wood looking, but it was just the size of a refrigerator. Polaroid technicians made a prototype in the mid-'70s, and then they developed 5 of these cameras. And their pitch was to make actual size one-to-one portraits, which were horrifying to the subject because there's so much detail. I look so old, there's only dogs and babies look good on this camera. So someone there started to invite artists, and I was in one of the first waves of artists invited to experiment with this large format Polaroid camera.
Wary of being pigeonholed as the dog photographer, Wegman stopped photographing Man Ray. It was a long year for both of them.
You know, I felt that was a danger I was getting so known for this. I wasn't so much worried at that point what would happen after he left, because dogs don't live forever. You know, I knew that one day he would be leaving. But it was more like just, I got to escape from this situation. I'll tell you, it was one of the saddest years for both of us. He would come into my studio and slump down and make this groaning sound. I guess we're not going to be doing anything today. You're just doing these drawings, right?
So he missed the work?
He really did. He missed, because I would spend lots of time in my studio just drawing and doing these little things and not engaging him at all. And I think we both, then in 79 and 80, that's when I was invited by Polaroid, and that sort of picked it up again. So, he was 9 years old when I first brought him to the Polaroid studio, and he loved that because it's social. You get to see other people. There's a trip involved. There's lunch. You know, it's just a whole, if you're an actor, you want to work. And if you're a director, you need to work. So I really miss that. And now I have 3 dogs. I work them not every day, but they do work. You know, we work and play, and when we run down to the studio, they know that they're going to be picked, and they sort of compete.
It was 5 years after Man Ray died before Wegman found himself with another dog, Fay Ray, his model and his muse.
There's 2 sides to the equation, of course, and the same thing is true of photographs. You have the photographer on one side of the camera and whatever else is on the other, and there's sort of an equal sign between them in a way. The photographer expresses his personality, and with a dog, especially one so responsive and so closely tied up with Wegman's life, there really is an interrelationship that you see in some of the most intimate photographs of, say, Alfred Stieglitz and his wife, Georgia O'Keeffe. And the intensity of that relationship between the dog and her willingness to pose and to do these things and to want to be funny and to want to do the right thing is quite visible, and it's really quite remarkable. And I think it's one of the things that adds a kind of heartwarming element, a depth and an intensity to the photographs that lies underneath some of the humorous aspects of them.
I had given a talk at Memphis State College. A woman in the audience said that she loved my work with Man Ray. She was a Weimaraner breeder, and that she would be honored to give me one of her puppies. No, thank you. I'm not going to have another dog, but let's go have a look. So it was a rainy day, and I remember maybe 30 Weimaraners, but I've seen the picture of me with these puppies, and there were only about 10. So, and there was one that when I got back to New York, I couldn't get her out of my mind. Her name was Cinnamon Girl, and she had these beautiful eyes. And so when I got to the city, I said, gee, you still willing to give me one of your puppies, since I'm really attached to Cinnamon Girl? So she did. She sent her to me a few weeks later, and she came to New York, and I said, what am I doing? This is really crazy. So I just looked at her. She was hanging out on my bed and in the other places, but she was kind of terrified of the city. She didn't really like the street sounds. It's really hard to walk. So I bought her a country place upstate, so she would be happy. And that was fun. She loved it there. But then I did live in the city, so we had to come back. It's a 2.5-hour drive, and it was just torture. Polaroid called me up, said, Bill, it's been years since you've used the camera. We're having a special. Come by. We've moved it to New York now. So I did, and I brought Faye, and I took her picture, and it's like, what were you thinking? Of course you're going to be photographing this dog. And Faye said the same thing. Of course, what were you waiting for? Aren't you Bill Wegman? You're supposed to be photographing me.
It was like it was destined.
It was. And she became so powerful and confident from this process. I swear, it really made her magnificent. She just needed to have this. A few years later, we bred her, and she gave me 8 incredible puppies, 3 of which I became very attached to. I lived with one, my sister had another, and a close friend another one. And they became the cast members of my works for Sesame Street, my short films, and in a gazillion children's books and pictures. And she was definitely the boss, the big kahuna of that group there. She was very domineering, and her personality was almost like Joan Crawford, or something like that. She was very powerful, but I think if I hadn't photographed her, I don't know what she would have been. She would have just been this kind of shivering mass that was comfortable in the country, but in New York, where I lived, she would have been pretty miserable unless she had this important job.
I was fortunate enough in 1986 when he got Faye and started photographing Faye at the Polaroid studio. I was interning. So I was fortunate enough to be with him when the first shots were made.
What did you think of them when you first saw them?
I loved them, and Faye was great, although when he was saying about Faye being incredibly skittish, I always made Faye bark. So I used to have to sort of sneak into the studio and sometimes go off camera because she was so nervous about everything, but his images were beautiful of her.
Well, I really noticed a big difference between Faye and Man Ray. Man Ray was just very stoic and solid and just so powerful the way he would fill that page in a way. He just had a kind of a nobility and power. And Faye, on the other hand, had almost like she kind of exploded out of the picture. She kind of had this coiled look, and then of course the beauty in her tones and so forth. When I had my litter, they were born a week premature, which is like being a month premature in human terms. So they were quite tiny. I got very attached to Batty because I really had to hold her onto Faye while she nursed. She was too weak to do that. So having my hand on her for days and nights really made me very attached to her. And it was almost a miracle that she lived. She was so small. She was about that big. I called her, because she looked like the little brown bats that you see in Maine. She looked like a little bat, so I called her Batina. And, just the way her personality emerged, though, there was one other girl in that litter, Crookie. She had a crooked tail, a little crooked white spot on her chest. We're just polar opposites. Crookie was, if you took a picture of her, she had round eyes like Faye, but she was more squirrely. Somehow Faye was beautiful. Crookie was kind of little and springy. And when you took her picture, it looked like she was saying, "Quick, the bomb's going to go off. We got to get out of here." And Batty would say, so what? Somebody will fix it or not. They had the complete opposite personality. Batty would fall asleep on the set. I'd put her in a chair, and in seconds she'd just be melted. She'd just completely melt into it. I don't know what it was. She was kind of like a reptile, I guess, the way she just draped over things. And to get her expressions, I would have to bellow at the top of my lungs, "Batty!" And you go. So they're all different, and that's kind of reveled in that. Chundo was probably the best actor that I've ever had. He played all of the man roles, Father Knows Best kind of thing, or the prince, and he was the prince in Cinderella. He was both the wolf and the woodsman in the Little Red Riding Hood. He was Mr. Hardley in the Hardley Boys. He was the evil caretaker. And to get him to look different, because he was the sweetest dog you ever saw, he'd always look at me like this. But if I backed far away, he'd squint, like, "Where are you going?" And then he would look evil. So that's a trick that I learned to make him look sinister, is to go far, far away. So we'd have to.
I am an owner of Weimaraners. I've had 3, and I remember seeing him on David Letterman years back. And then on Sesame Street, and even when I had my first puppy, I'd walk my dog Coco around the neighborhood, and all the kids would say, "Oh, the Sesame Street dog, the Sesame Street dog." But I'm fascinated with his photography, and I'm a designer and have an art background, and I just love the work. And I love the breed, so the combination just makes me happy.
The personalities and physical characteristics of the Weimaraner breed were a perfect match for Wegman's wit and artistic style.
They're just so unique, and I mean, we've had a couple of different Weimaraners, and you know, once you've owned one, you know, you see the looks in their eyes, and you know exactly what he was thinking when he took the pictures.
I think there is certainly an affinity with Weimaraner owners. When you own a Weimaraner, I mean, they're such unique beings, such unique animals. They have wonderful personalities, and when you own one, you can see it's certainly not easy what he does, but the Weimaraner, they just pose that way. They just do that naturally. I have so many pictures of my dogs sleeping that you think, how do they do that?
They're darling. They're just darling, but they look at you with these eyes that just look into your soul, you know, and he captures that.
I think that they are really unique. I would have been able to take a picture or two, but I wouldn't have been able to take over and over again and have it evolve. Partly it has to do with their blankness. I mean, it's kind of a powerful blankness, but they're gray. They're not spotted or furry or fluffy or, you know, foldy or anything. They're just kind of lean and blank in a way. They're called the gray ghosts. That's what I think of them as. They inhabit all of these different guises. When you see them in the woods running through, they're really like shadows, and amazingly beautiful dogs. The way they pick up the light, you know, when you're just looking at them at home on the couch, a light ray of light comes in, and it just gets both absorbed and reflected in amazingly beautiful ways. Has to do with someone said that their fur is really made up of almost like mirrors, so they reflect. In the studio, they look brownish. Outside on a blue day, they look kind of purpley, so they really pick up light. Faye did especially that. She was a kind of a cinnamon color, hence her name, kind of a tawny brownish gray, but outside she did look somewhat purpley.
One of the things that's amusing, astounding about many of the images, not all of them, is that Faye becomes a human being, or does a human being become Faye? Often, when Wegman first discovered this, he had been shooting dogs, both Man Ray, Faye's predecessor, and Faye for a number of years. And all of a sudden, one day, he was putting clothes on her, and the model, the person who was helping dress the model, Faye, put her arms through the arms just to kind of make them come around the dog. And all of a sudden, voila, there was a human being with the dog's head. And thus he began to make a whole series of works which are anthropomorphic, in which something that would not normally be human takes on human behavior, human characteristics, human traits.
Well, I never really dressed Man Ray up as a person, but with a Polaroid camera, it's vertical, so you have to get something up. So I got used to putting them on pedestals and making them, you know, up like that. I remember once my assistant Andrea was talking to me behind Faye, and you could barely see Andrea because she was kind of protecting Faye from falling and kept her kind of solid. And I had some fabric around that I was draping, not as a person but as a column, and it just cracked me up because it looked like Faye had Andrea's arms and that she was talking to me with her hands. So I got the idea that I could really do almost like how silent movies were made in the old days through dramatic gestures, and so that gave me the idea of certain ways of making movies and so forth through hand gestures, just like Sarah Bernhardt did.
Addie and Faye are playing a game of cards.
That epiphany opened a new direction for Wegman's photos, books, and videos. His troupe of dogs became the cast for works on Sesame Street, Saturday Night Live, and his Hardly Boys movie. He became the director.
You can't yell and scream. You know, the classic director is always sort of bossy and bellowy and stuff like that. You can't do that with a dog. You can't boom around like that because they'll look like this, and you don't want that. If you want that, you can do that. But I always wanted the dogs just to be kind of melt into their own expression classically. Very rarely did I want, except in some of the movies, did I want them to be anything other than just there. I loved working outside with them because they would pick up their real dog scent ways. Their noses would turn, they'd hear sounds, and they'd have their own life. I'd just borrow their bodies for a while, and let their minds do whatever they wanted to. So there's a letting go and capturing that is always implicit with working with an animal.
I think one of the reasons that he is so accessible to the general public is that a lot of his work utilizes humor.
Mrs. Hartley decided not to play golf that day. Perhaps just the back nine.
It's not a kind of ironic, sort of nasty wit. It really is a very genuine human wit. But there's also, what makes them funny is the degree to which he works with a kind of perfection of the other means. So if you look at the details of the photographs, at their core may be something that is humorous, but they're executed so beautifully and everything just works. He's quite a perfectionist. And so it makes the humor seem effortless.
Batty and Chundo and Crookie, they saw that their mother was doing this, that they were born into this theatrical world, and this is what we do. We are in this troupe. So it's just like circus dogs, I guess, or something like that. They have a job, and they're not punished for it, certainly, but they're not necessarily given treats either. It's just what we do. We come to the studio, we're called to go up here, Bill talks to us, then we go back to our couch. So this is what we do.
If it makes you feel, if it makes you think, if it makes you laugh, if it moves you or to love or to hate, then I would say it's art. But there's not too many things to hate in William Wegman Fay. It's mostly things that you will love, ponder, laugh at, and take away with you as a mental museum in your mind of Wegman's art.
I love my work showing up in not just the major cities like LA and New York and Paris and whatever. It's really great for me to be able to show in all of these other cities. So I love it when it travels. I hope it goes to some other places.
Well, they did it again. They saved the town, at least for the time being. Good job, boys. I say so, too. Here's to us.
To us, the boys, the Hartley boys.
Fay at the Akron Art Museum has been provided exclusively by Summa Foundation.